Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Exploring Divine Resonance. If this is your first time, welcome to the circle here. And whether you're participating through the Zoom room or you're participating in the YouTube simulcast or the podcast, I just want to express my appreciation for the opportunity to connect with you in this way and to do a little bit of spiritual exploration. The general agenda for our time together in this series is to explore an idea or a concept and then drop into transmission, and then we close with a Q&A time. And if you're not currently part of the Zoom room dynamic, you can make yourself part of the Zoom room by going to exploringdivineresonance.com and add your name and your email address. It's free to participate in, and we'd love to have you here in the Zoom room. If you are on the YouTube simulcast, whether you're watching the replay or the live stream, I won't see your questions as you post them in the comments, but I will respond to you there. And I also want to give you a heads up. We're going to do a bonus Q&A session this week on Friday at a different time. The idea is to make sure that our international participants have an opportunity to engage in an interactive session on Friday. So we'll actually be starting this Friday at noon Eastern time. And again, the interactive portion of that conversation, the questions and the discussion and so on, will take place exclusively here in the Zoom room, but it will be simulcast out on YouTube. Okay, so that's our setup. And today our focus is on 3 approaches to embodied knowledge. I'm excited to explore those with you, but before we do anything else, let's gather in our circle, shall we? Setting everything else aside energetically, emotionally, physically, and otherwise. With your eyes closed, breathing in and out through the nostrils, palms to the sky, if all of that is comfortable for you. As always, please don't operate a motor vehicle or heavy equipment of any sort during this or any time we're together. If you've sat in circle before, you may know some people, maybe including you, have a tendency to kind of drop out. People will describe it as a process of going to sleep. But if this is your first time, you may be thinking, well, how is that even possible? We're doing some deep energetic work, and it's just best if you set everything else aside. So you're not trying to multitask on any level, but certainly not at a level that might leave you or others' safety in question. So if you're driving, pull off to the side of the road if you would, please. And as you find that place in the circle that resonates most with you, deep breath in, hold. As you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before in this day, all the way out to the count of 8. Another deep breath in and hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since we last gathered. And if this is your first time, since the first of the year, all the way out to the count of 8. Another deep breath in and the hold. As you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since you were born, all the way out to the count of 8. Head, heart, and hips. Another deep breath in and hold. As you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since the inception of your soul, all the way out to the count of 8. Head, heart, hips, mystery. See the breath. The breath is becoming you, and you are becoming the breath. Be the breath. See the breath of the planet serving you and everyone and everything. With each breath, you are connected by your breath. See how the breath of the planet becomes the breath of the cosmos. With each breath, you are connected to everyone and everything throughout all of creation, including that energy that underwrites everything else, the divine, a light originating perhaps at the far reaches of the cosmos. Yet with each breath, it draws closer and closer to you until eventually it's close enough that you can perceive those twin frequencies, the frequency of the divine itself by whatever name, and the frequency of perfect health, intertwined such that there is no separating one from the other. the light form, be it a wave or a particle, drawing closer and closer until eventually it connects in, perhaps initially at your nostrils, and then instantaneously throughout every level of your being, known and unknown, an invitation extended to each of the smallest aspects of you. Come return to your natural state of resonance and alignment. And with that, the artifacts of dissonance appear to fall away and gather at the universal drain. For whatever remains in separation, I invite you to remove the universal plug. I'll do the same. The divine is becoming you, and you are becoming the divine, and the river is flowing. If you'd like to participate in the deeper transmission, then with your permission, let's begin. As I've been sitting today and reflecting on our theme, I've been noticing how there are actually maybe more than three kind of expressions of embodied knowledge. It's kind of interesting how that awareness tends to unfold. So I want to talk about the three that I was initially thinking about, or that were showing up, and then point out a couple of variations on it. And I want to acknowledge, in the past, I've talked about embodied knowledge as a special case. In other words, I've made reference to what Immanuel Kant referred to as a priori and a posteriori as two forms of knowledge. And then I've tried to delineate a third form of knowledge, and I've referred to it as embodied knowledge. But really, as I think about it, each form of knowledge is embodied. It's just a different kind of embodiment. And I want to illustrate that with what I hope is a simple example. I've been thinking about it today. I've been looking at this for a while, but let's see how it goes in terms of describing and whether or not this makes sense. I will invite you to, of course, we're going to have some interactive time together on the other side of transmission. And so if there are things that are coming up, any questions or things that don't make a lot of sense or whatever, you're looking for clarity, I would really encourage you to jot a note down while we're together in this part of our time together today, because it's possible once we go into transmission that thought will just disappear and you'll sink into this deeper felt experience of the divine within. And in that space, at least for some people, the questions just disappear. But for lots of different reasons, I don't think it makes sense to focus on questions at the beginning or to be sharing in a Q&A format right now. So just gentle reminder and encouragement to write down any questions you might have as we're going. Okay. So let's first address the first two expressions of embodied knowledge. And I want to use math as the example here. And I'm going to use very, very simple math to illustrate this, at least initially. And I won't be able to use more complex math because it's not embodied knowledge. It's actually not intellectual knowledge for me either. But we can talk about more complex math as an example. And you might have different levels of embodied knowledge for more advanced math. And I'll see if I can't illustrate this very clearly for you. So at the level of what I'm calling intellectual knowledge, that is something that is embodied at the level of the mind. So this would be to say it's embodied at the level of logical knowing. So my example here is going to be very simple. 2 plus 2 equals 4. We know that. And if I were wired this way, I think I used to be wired this way a long, long time ago. I used to have this capacity, but I have not exercised this in many, many years, decades. So I'm incapable of following through on my illustration here. But I believe that it would be possible, not just with this example, but with many, many examples, to illustrate it at the level of logic, right? And that would lead to intellectual knowing. So maybe a better example might be of intellectual knowing might be if we all agreed that there was a mathematical authority that we could accept, and this math authority offered a document or a book with a bunch of math, we could look at it and we could read about the math, and we would have a level of intellectual embodied knowledge about that, assuming we could understand the math. But this is where it gets a little interesting, because the second level of embodied knowledge is at the level of experience, but it's experience in the Kantian perspective, a posteriori. It's a function of some interaction. So this type of embodiment would be not just that we understood the math at a logical level, but let's say it's embodied at a deeper level such that it could be taught, or if I embodied it, I could teach you the math. And I want to differentiate in a way here. If I might have intellectual knowledge that's embodied about the math that I'm teaching you, and someone, a math expert, perhaps someone in this circle, might give me a series of instructions. Say these things, Ken, as you're teaching this math. And I might be able to teach it to you if I repeat what they're saying. But if I don't understand the math personally, then it's not embodied at this second level of knowledge. So if I can't actually do the math, then it's not embodied at the second level of knowledge. And 2 plus 2 equals 4 seems like not the right example here, because presumably we can all add 2 and 2, and we can all come to the conclusion that 4 is the answer. But if we get into more complex math, that presumably isn't true anymore. At least I could say it's not true with me. If we get into very complex math, there are many, many types of math that I've never studied ever, not even once in my life, where I have no type 1 embodied knowledge nor type 2. And even if I could get type 1 embodied knowledge, I suspect that it would be very difficult, if not potentially impossible, for me to have the type 2 knowledge. My brain isn't wired that way. That stuff is difficult for me. And here the math example starts to fall apart, because what would be the third type of embodied knowledge in the from an embodiment perspective, a bodily perspective on embodied knowledge? The first type of knowledge would be in the head, the second type would be head and heart, and the third type would be in the hips. But math is not an example of knowledge that could be embodied in the hips, I want to suggest, unless it's this kind of math. And this kind of math in the following example would be 2 plus 2 equals 1. Now, what am I trying to illustrate when I say this? I'm trying to say something that I guess we could use math as an illustration for, but I'm trying to illustrate a spiritual concept, which we could say generally is wherever two or more are gathered, right? There is one. So in that version, in that form of embodied knowledge, 2 plus 2 equals 1. But you'll notice that there's not a congruent line here. My example has not established a congruent line. So maybe this is clear as mud. And just to make it more interesting, I want to try to offer you 2 additional expressions or one variant for both the first and the second form of embodied knowledge. And then I'll use a spiritual example because that's, at least for me, the stuff that resonates. And it is the area where we are capable of intellectual knowledge that's embodied in the mind. We can be embodied in the heart, in the mind and the heart with regard to spiritual knowledge. And we can also be embodied in the hips with regard to spiritual knowledge. And the difference between those conditions or states of embodied knowledge would be dramatic, is dramatic, not just would be. It's not a hypothetical thing. It's a very practical thing. And we can discuss this in greater depth in our third segment. I mean, I'll give you a few examples, but we can go into it in much greater depth in our third segment together today. Okay, so here's an example of spiritual. Oh, I'm going to give you the variances. So the first variance is, and it's the same variance for both the first and the second form of embodied knowledge. The question is whether it's integrated or unintegrated. And I've been sitting with this question of whether or not it's possible to have unintegrated knowledge in that's unintegrated embodied knowledge in the hips. And I keep thinking the answer to that is yes, but I think there's more for me to explore on that. So that might also be an interesting thing for us to discuss. In any case, without a doubt, there could be unintegrated embodied knowledge in the mind and unintegrated embodied knowledge in the mind and the heart, or the first and the second form of embodied knowledge. And so let's use an example here. So in the case of the idea, the concept, we are all one. So I don't mean we in the circle, I mean we on the planet or we in the cosmos. We are all one. So as a concept, we could come up with a level 1 knowledge description of this that is strictly logical. And at the second level of knowledge, we could have an experiential form of that knowledge that is shared through conversation or exploration. And at the third level, we could have an embodied experience of that, wherein it shifts from even the second form, which is still conceptual at some depth, to a direct encompassing experience of that knowledge that we are all one. And I actually, all I can do is talk about this example, and I'll try to give you some others that might be more clear. But because I perceive that I am embodied in that knowledge in the third form, so it's not going to be very meaningful for me to try to talk about probably any of the examples, but I'll just try to do this. So if I were sitting here talking to you from a place which I might have previously referred to as a state of disembodiment, but if you're entirely disembodied, you drop the body, right? So the question isn't so much disembodiment or embodiment, but to what degree one is embodied. And of course, there's knowledge that comes with that level of embodiment. So if I were talking from the first tier of knowledge embodiment, that we're all one, I might be able to describe this logically to you and put on a case that would be entirely airtight, logically speaking, about how we are all one. And if I were embodied at the second level, I might be able to have a discussion about that with you, where we're sharing ideas about being all one. And if I'm in the third level, then there's an experience that I'm actually speaking from. And that experience is contained or expressed in my communication. And that experience it's much easier to see it, or let me see. Here's another example. So prior to September 30th, 2011, I had not yet surrendered. So I understood intellectually, when one faces challenges, ultimately the invitation is to surrender. I understood that at a logical level, at the first level of knowledge, and I even understood it at the second level of knowledge. But because I had not surrendered myself, I had not experienced it yet. And so I was not embodied in the third level of embodied knowledge, not even close. And so if we go back and listen together, which I'm not going to do, but we could go listen to a teaching or a session that I facilitated. The resonance, in particular, if that was focused on surrender, the resonance of what I was sharing was nowhere near the embodied resonance that it is now. And the difference for that has to do with my embodied knowledge of it. Think of somebody who's trying to teach you math but can't solve the math problem. They offer it, like if I'm trying to teach you complex math and you're asking me questions and I'm referring to a book, but I can't solve the problem myself. Can you see the disconnect, right? I can't actually help you solve the math problem. And so, because I can't do it myself, so there's no way for me to reframe it for you. I'm stuck with whatever the words of advice are from the member of the circle who is, advising me of what to say. And it's the same thing with spirituality. If I'm talking from a place where I'm embodied in intellectual knowledge, and that is the full extent of where I'm communicating from, I can't even have a conversation about it. And the deeper resonance or transmission presence of what I'm speaking of isn't there with me, and it certainly can't be there or enlivened within you because I'm not embodied there. When I talk to and work with spiritual messengers, I try to refer to this in terms of if you're speaking from the head or you're speaking from the heart. Many people understand that difference, speaking from the head or speaking from the heart. But it's very difficult to articulate what the difference is with somebody who's speaking from the hips, except to say this: merely their being presence is communicating what the topic, the embodied knowledge is being shared, or the presence of the divine within is being enlivened through the individual's expression or being presence without even any language. So that carrying wave, I don't have my tablet hooked up this week for pictures, but that carrying wave is here and the words are up here and everything is communicating, right? So there might be things that are landing at the level of thought, and there might be things that are landing at the level of heart. But the most profound part of what the person who's speaking from the hips is communicating is actually coming through at a level that's very difficult to even acknowledge with words. And the question of embodied knowledge, it isn't just a question of communicating with other people. This has to do with all sorts of different aspects of life, which if we accept or realize or recognize that the spiritual realm underlies every other part of life, we can start to see how the embodied knowledge at this third tier is the thing that resonates up through every other part of life. So it results in an experience of what people have referred to as flow, or what I refer to as embodied resonance. It's one of the reasons why the experience of resonance changes depending on the level of embodied knowledge or the embodied experience of one's own divine presence within. Because at the level of resonance in the mind, that's a very different kind of resonance. It feels differently and enlivens at a different level than at the level of the heart, than at the level of the hips. All right. Let me just sit for a moment and see if there's anything else here that I'd like to give voice to before we shift into transmission. The other thing that I want to acknowledge, and it's a little bit different or more difficult for me to try to communicate with this with words. Notice that the first type of knowledge is the most common, and then the second type of knowledge flows from the first type of knowledge. But the third type of knowledge is very, very different, and it generally does not flow from the first two types of knowledge. It's an experientially based dynamic. It's a dynamic that is not dependent on the logical expression of a concept. It, nor is it dependent on, let's say, being able to do the math, so to speak. It's and that can be very frustrating and challenging for people who are inspired to open to the third type of knowledge, to knowledge that is embodied in the hips. And it also can lead to a lot of confusion, because the translation, if it's a top down, type 1 knowledge down, doesn't really work. A bottom up does, but it doesn't. The reason it works is because the primary expression of that integration is from the being experience, not from the thinking experience, nor the feeling experience. Okay, I want to leave it at that and then trust that we'll explore this more in our third segment today. So for now, I'm going to say this. If you're concluding with this part of the transmission, I'm going to invite you to return the universal plug, knowing the transmission will come to a close. Otherwise, let's continue on with silent transmission. Opening into our second segment together today, I'm affirming the plug has been pulled. We have begun. With your eyes closed, breathing in and out through the nostrils, palms to the sky. Let's sink in. And it seems like some embodiment work here, maybe with a little bit of guidance, might be helpful. A few words. So just bring your attention to the top of your head, to the crown. And notice that that energy center, that center of gravity, so to speak, is moving lower. And as it does, it enlivens, it animates. And if you allow yourself to feel and express, it transmutes any noise. perhaps all the way down to the collarbone. But wherever it is for you now is perfect. Moving lower. As it descends, it's coming home into the hips, into the pelvic girdle for women, for men, just a little bit lower. But don't worry about thinking nor guiding. Just be with the experience. It's not a function of intention. And so if you are holding intention right now, I would invite you to let it go. You don't have to direct energy or hold your mind or thoughts in a certain posture or focus. The being experience of divine resonance underlies everything else. If it's helpful to have something to focus on for the mind, consider this. With each breath, you are connected to everyone and everything, including the divine, the light, drawing closer the twin frequencies, the invitation extended to each and every aspect of your body, mind, and being. The artifacts of dissonance falling away and gathering, then departing through the universal drain. The divine is becoming you, and you are becoming the divine. And the river is flowing. Be the river. the deeper experience of divine presence is available in every moment of our lives, whether we're sitting in circle or not. One aspect of the shift from silence in a circle to being in this space all the time comes with living and being and interacting with others in accordance with what unfolds in the depth of divine presence. Initially and on an ongoing basis, an act of faith, to be sure. Beautiful. If you're concluding with this part of the transmission, I invite you to return the universal plug, knowing the transmission will come to a close. Otherwise, we'll continue on here into our final segment, interactive Q&A and reflections. I'm going to open up into our third segment. I wanted to just share a quick example of the 3 types of knowledge that I think might be a little more clear. So let's say some point early on in your life, you read a book that talked about falling in love. Here's what it's going to be like when you fall in love. There's this and there's that. This is the experience. This is what it feels like. First type of knowledge. Second type of knowledge. You talk to some of your friends. The conversation expanded. It became multidimensional. Second type of knowledge. Then you actually fell in love. Head over heels in love. Third type of knowledge. You had an embodied experience of it. And the embodied, well, you had an embodied experience of it at the level of being. It wasn't just thinking and feeling, it was being. And in this third type of knowledge is a radically different level of knowledge that has a new depth and breadth. And there are lots of examples like that, but that's how I wanted to kick off our third segment today. If you're new to the circle and you're in the Zoom room, all you do is just unmute your line and ask a question or share a reflection. If you're not in the Zoom room, you can join us here by signing up and registering for the class. It's free to do so. exploringdivineresonance.com. Just add your name and email address, and you can join us for interactive time for regular sessions. It also gives you the ability to download the audio, the video, the transcription of each segment of each class, much more. There are emails that go out on Monday and Wednesday of each week with a study guide for that week's session and so on. Lots of goodies if you want to register. And if you have questions over on the YouTube channel, you can just add them into comments and I'll follow up and respond to them when I've got a moment to do so. Glad you're here. Unmute away if you've got stuff coming up you want to share or reflect on or ask about.
I can.
Hello, it's Maeve.
It is Maeve. How are you?
Maeve. I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm really good.
Good. It's
And
good to hear your voice.
it's good to be able to speak.
Phenomenal.
What I'm loving about this session is this incredible gift that you have of bringing such clarity to something that I don't even know how you are even putting to words what you're describing. And just now, I was feeling this incredible from my feet to the crown of my head and beyond. This just amazing sensation of complete connectedness while simultaneously being completely disconnected. And I love it. I just love these experiences that you help us to experience. And I get that everybody's going to have something different because everybody's who they are. And you know, I hear people say, you know, we are in this world but not of this world.
Mm.
And there are times when I love it when you say, don't try and guide anything, don't try and think of anything, don't focus on anything. And it's like, it just makes perfect sense. This is tremendous, what you're giving, what you're sharing, and what I'm receiving.
That's beautiful, Maeve. Thank you for giving voice to your experience of it and for attempting language for your experience of the ineffable. It's a brave thing to try to put words to it.
You do it so well, week after week. You're a champion of that, and
It's
I'm
kind of
truly,
you to
truly
say.
grateful to have been able to share this space with you.
NIU, Maeve. It's the thing that comes through as you're sharing is your presence. It's the, there's the X factor when we look for how can I fill in the blank? How can I open to this? How can I master this? It's embodied presence is the first key. And it's wonderful to feel and hear that in your reflection and your expression. Thank you for sharing and thank you for being in the circle. And it's funny, I'll just say this before anyone else unmutes to reflect or ask or share. It's, it's funny to me. I'm trying not to laugh hysterically because as I'm saying these things, I'm thinking, swing and a miss, swing and a miss, swing and a miss. So I'm glad to hear that that something is landing in a meaningful way. It's in a way, it's much more comfortable for me at least, to be in silence or much closer to silence. I think that's where I can encounter the things we're exploring, and also where the divine's expression through me can support most that experience or whatever work there is that's unfolding when we sit together most powerfully is in the silence. I almost said star two to raise your hand. It's a good sign. I've forgotten that the camera's on and I'm not thinking about the fact that we're on Zoom. And so if we're not on Zoom, then we're in the way that I've been working with groups and teaching for, except for the last year, the entirety of my career, which is on a virtual conference line. But in this case, if you like, you can have your camera on. It's not required. But perhaps in a wonderful move of liberation, you're in charge of unmuting yourself. You can just do that when you're ready, if you're ready.
I have a question. It's not totally related to this. In the Spiritual Messenger Mastery 1, you said that there were three things for a messenger to kind of get a hold of. One is embodiment, and the second one was calling your power home, and then the third was kind of beneath the sand. So I wanted to know, how do you call your power home? I mean, what kind of practices are there for that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Angelica. So just by way of making sure everyone understands the references you're making here, I'm just going to take a moment to explain the program that you're asking about and where it can be found, if that's okay, Angelica, and then I'll answer your question. I think the first time that I mentioned that, the first class was in Foundations of Spiritual Mastery 1, and then subsequently in Amplifying Resonance. And in both of those programs, Amplifying Resonance was and is the live update to Foundations of Spiritual Mastery 1. And these programs, some of you may have them in your library already. They're available as standalone programs if you'd like to take them as self-studies. And they're also, actually, all of these programs are included with Resonance Institute membership. And I'm pretty sure the link is in the description for Resonance Institute membership. But if it's not, I'm pretty sure you can just go to resonanceinstitutemembership.com and that'll direct you if you're interested in exploring that further. So to your question, Angelica, in the 6 practices of spiritual mastery, I perceived the value of calling power home actually, after soul embodiment. I saw it as the second practice. And what's interesting is that over the years, that practice has been both emphasized and in different ways de-emphasized by me. And more, I see it as a really important practice. So if you're ever listening to something where I act like that's not that important, you can just remember me saying here, I think it's actually really important. And there are a number of instances of where I'm facilitating, whatever my experience or God's expression of that practice through me or whatever. The primary of those is included in each of those iterations of Foundations of Spiritual Mastery 1 in FSMI, and then I think there are 3 instances of Amplifying Resonance. Each of those has a standalone practice of calling power home. Additionally, and you're already in the sanctuary library, so you know that I haven't organized it very well. It's not easy to get to this, but I'm sure I've done any number of calling power home sessions over the years. But and for those of you who don't know, sanctuary is also included in membership, and historically has been the circle that was for graduates of either FSMI or Amplifying Resonance. That circle has been active for more than 10 years now on a weekly basis. Let me see if I'm actually answering your question. I keep footnoting to explain to anyone who doesn't know or here's where to find it. But to come back to your question, am I on point here?
Does it have another name somewhere? Because I didn't find it. You say, I mean, it was in that thing. It said, do the practice, but I didn't have it in where I looked. I mean, in that program, it wasn't included, I think, or I couldn't find it. So
okay. So if you look in it may be a little obscure in Foundations of Spiritual Mastery 1. That was my first attempt at at an online learning dynamic. And a lot of that class was not taught live. So I paired things up between a video and which was sort of a description, and then the practice, which was a straight audio download. But one of the what's the word I'm looking for? One of the things about the audio onlys, I think this is true. I haven't looked at this in many years, but I'm pretty sure I put a music track under it, which could be very distracting. So the easier way to get to it, I would guess, certainly more updated versions are going to be in the 3 amplifying resonance circles. I think there are 3, there are at least 2. And in those, it will likely be in the second week. But if it's not the second week, it'll be at the second practice. And it will be called, in amplifying resonance, it will be called Calling Power Home. And there will be a segment of those classes that's dedicated to Calling Power Home that is a transmission only recording. It'll be audio only.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I can, if you or anyone in the circle wants specific links, here's where they are in your library inside the Resonance Institute membership. You can drop me an email, ken@kenwstone.com, and I'll send you the links to where those are. If you've heard me talk about, thank you, Angelica, for the question. If you've heard me talk about Resonance Institute membership and your eyes glaze over, or your ears glaze over, and you think, oh, blah, 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 membership. Listen, let me just say this very briefly. It's $97 a month for everything basically I've ever taught. There are exceptions. I've done advanced small group immersion programs that aren't part of membership. Private sessions aren't included in membership, but Introduction to Spiritual Mastery, Embodiment 101, Resonance Community membership, which is a monthly transmission, Sanctuary, which is weekly, Deep Dive, which is every other week on Zoom, video, audio. I don't know how many hours a month the Deep Dive group spends together live. Couldn't even begin to tell you how, I guess it's 8, 10, 12, at least 12 hours a month that we spend in that circle. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff there. So that's all included in membership. Did you have something to say, Angelica, or ask about?
I just figured it out because I sent you an email. It's 14 hours a month, I think.
Yeah, 14 hours in the Deep Dive. So 14 hours in the Deep Dive, and then another probably hour and a half a week in Sanctuary, and then another 3 hours a month in the Resonance Community, plus all the self-study programs. So I was just iterating what those are. The core classes are Igniting Resonance, Amplifying Resonance, Embodying Resonance, Spiritual Messenger Mastery, and Embodied Messenger Mastery. If you took those back to back, it might take you, and you did them week at a time, might take you a year and a half or longer to get through all those classes. But you could download it. You can be a member for a month, download them all, and then stop your membership. This is not some racket to try to ensnare you in a process that you're not a willing participant in. It's an attempt to make available these classes and programs and resources and all the ways that God expresses through me that could be very helpful or supportive in lots of different ways, potentially to you. And that's what it's there for. So anyway, Clint, you have your hand up. Go ahead, man. You want to unmute and ask or chat or whatever it is?
Yeah, it's about today's lesson. John Vervaeke divides knowledge into 2 pieces. He calls it knowledge and understanding. Is embodied knowledge similar to understanding?
I would say it's different from understanding. It's an experiential understanding. The person you're referencing seems to be, at least from what I'm picking up from you talking about it, seems to be echoing Immanuel Kant's a priori and a posteriori delineations. And those are meaningful, but I'm not trying to say, but like there's a problem with it. I just think there's another dimension of knowledge that is experiential, for which it doesn't fit within the traditional classification of knowledge either. That's sort of part of the problem with talking about it. But
Okay, I can't disagree with you there.
yeah, it's hard to communicate about it though. At least it is for me, Clint.
Well, I'm saying it's experiential.
Yeah.
Does say it all pretty much.
Yeah. There you go. Beautiful.
All right,
Thanks,
thanks.
Clint. Yeah, thanks for being here. Clint figured out how to put his hand up, and I couldn't even give you instructions for that. Somebody might be able to, but oh, maybe it's down here in the little dots at the bottom and so on. Reactions. Anyway, you can do that or not. It's up to you. Or you can just unmute your line if you've got something coming up.
Ken, that's you gave us a lot to unpack today, including I'm still trying to kind of wade my way through your email. The cave analogy, which fits in perfectly. I'm just kind of off today for some reason. Just as you're talking about having trouble putting language to things like that because it's more something to be experienced, sometimes I'm finding it hard to translate all that into something my mind can conceptualize. And for some odd reason, I think that's a good thing. My mind,
it is. I agree.
Because some area I sort of get it on a deeper level, and the need to understand is not really there, which I've never really encountered that before, because I've always needed to read and reread these things to understand them for my sake, and the need or the drive to understand it doesn't seem to be there. It's as if some inner knowledge is there that I do understand enough of it to kind of integrate it in my life however I need to. I will say one thing: I appreciate your explanation email in terms of the spiritual leaders, the conspiracy theories. That's the first time anyone's really addressed that in such a way that I did understand that and found it kind of fascinating as to why some of them have kind of not acting as you, I guess, would expect a spiritual teacher or leader. Luckily, the ones I follow, including you, really haven't presented that. I think there's maybe one I follow that I've questioned, but they're not completely spiritual. That's just an aspect. They're more into medicine and science and things like that. So I can kind of understand where they're coming from there. But that I found really beneficial and helpful to sort of explain that.
Yeah, I appreciate the feedback, Brian. If anyone who's participating in any way, if you're on the Zoom call, you should be getting the normal weekly email from me, from my heart email. But if you're on YouTube and you're thinking, wait, what did I miss out on here? You can go to kenwstone.com/newsletter, add your name and email address. And then just when you get the confirmation email, just send me an email that says, hey, just reply to that and say, hey, Ken, what's that email Brian was talking about? The subject line of the email, if you want to put it in your note to me, was the vaccine and Plato's cave, I think. Isn't that it?
Yeah.
And it's a discussion of the cave allegory and so on. And I'll forward it to you. Eventually, these things will get posted in the blog and be more easily located. But yeah. And to your point about, coming to that place of embodied knowledge where there isn't an instinct to try to have it fit or be able to articulate how it fits with prior sort of level 1, 2 knowledge. This is such a beautiful launch point that you're describing from my perspective, Brian. It's wonderful to hear your good voice to it.
Yeah, it started when I read your email or your newsletter prior to the transmission and listened to the transmission, but then I set it aside. So I'll come back to it later, but it wasn't until we started transmission and stuff that it started to kind of come together that, I really don't need to go back. I don't really need to understand that whatever I've got from it is integrated or whatever, and will kind of come up as it needs to. So I
Yep.
did find that fascinating. It was like the transmission, the experience we had tonight, sort of, part one was that, and then part two was all this. So it's really interesting, but I don't have a lot to go into on it because I don't really, it's a little beyond what I'm familiar with. So, but
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I appreciate your reflection. Those of you who are interested in my commentary on the cave allegory, and I mean, there's much more in the book that I'm working on, have been working on for a long time now. One way, if you want to sort of be notified officially when the book is in the queue to be published and so on, there is a way to sign up on my website to be notified. I wish I could give you the URL, but just go to kenwstone.com and you'll find it. And if you can't, just send me an email and say, hey, put me on this thing, or show me where to register to be on the list. It's not off the top about the book. Plato's cave allegory, to my mind, offers such a beautiful and rich exploration. It's funny too. I'll just share this briefly, Brian. When I was writing, I had so I explore the allegory in chapter 8, which is called "Living in the Mirror," and I had this placeholder in the book, in the manuscript, that said, okay, find somebody's commentary and then put it in here. And I kept putting it off, writing all around it. And finally I got to the point where I'm like, okay, it's time for that commentary. And I went looking for it, and I couldn't find anyone else that had commentary that made sense to me, or that was describing what I was seeing. And so I was stuck writing my own commentary, which, if you've read the cave allegory, there's a certain chewiness there. There's, of course, if you've read my manuscript, there's a certain chewiness there too. But anyway, it took a number of weeks of just really sinking in and allowing myself to be present to be able to articulate the commentary. And what I shared in the newsletter today was just a very brief snippet of, some of those insights, the mapping between the stages of consciousness and the cave allegory, and the various conditions, the prisoner chained, free, but still a prisoner of the cave, coming out into the sun, and so on. Anyway, thanks for reflecting and on that, Brian.
Yeah, I think you put it really well in the email. And as an aside, the one quote, which you weren't able to name the quote, but something about drinking out of the ocean, not drink out of, made me think now in this experience that, sometimes we don't need to keep delving deeper. I mean, I've done it. I've been guilty of it. I'm sure we all have, of coming to an understanding of something, and yet our mind still can't seem to grasp it. And so we try to understand it more. So we go further. I liken it to a friend I used to have that was a really good salesman, and they would sell people appliances, and they'd sell them the extra warranties and stuff. And yet, the person was completely sold, yet they keep talking about it. And stuff like that. It's like, okay, you sold them everything you could. Why do you keep going on about it? But that's reminds me of that quote you said about, how much of the ocean you need to drink before you realize it's all salt water. Maybe that's how much time we might spend trying to understand something when we really don't. We get it the first time, or we get it, and we don't need to keep driving to or pushing to understand it, or like you said earlier, trying to guide it or whatever. Just, I think it's just the mind trying to grasp it, trying to make it fit within. I'm reminded of a quote from a book. I'll end on this. Well, it was a science fiction book, but it was about a ship's computers. Well, not the whole book, but part was the ship's computers were trying to analyze data from a different dimension where physics and stuff doesn't exist the same way as here. And the author put it brilliantly, where he said that the computers were trying to distort the data to try to make it fit within the parameters its designers intended. And I think that's like the perfect allegory of what our minds do in our lives. And like I get, if you really look around, you can get stuff like that out of life, from quotes, science fiction books, movies, things that are unrelated to spirituality, lyric from music. It just amazes me how life can present us with these things and we don't have to look for it in the places we think we need to.
Beautiful, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Hi, Ken. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Hi, this is Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
I listen to your work when I can, and I'm very interested in hopefully soon maybe becoming a portal member and going deeper. Right now in my life, I'm dealing with hypervigilance, fight, flight, or freeze. I already dealt with complex PTSD, but I had a family tragedy last year. And so I don't want to commit to something when I know I'm all over the place. But soon I would like to go dive deeper in your work, because no matter how floody I am, when I listen to you, it just kind of calms me down and I always feel better. I can't tell you why. But basically, I want to thank you and ask, do you have a way I could donate in the meantime, just as something to say thank you for what you do in these Wednesdays? Okay.
Yeah, there is. Thanks for asking, Michelle, and for being here and for your reflection. If you go to kenwstone.com/donate, actually, it's
Okay.
a page I
Okay.
recently put together because other people have
Okay.
asked for exactly the same thing you just did, for the same
Okay.
reason. So yeah, thanks for considering that and for being here and for the privilege of walking with you.
Thank you so much. Do you have any insight in something simple I can do to try to stay more grounded and less hyper vigilant? When my brain's just like, I'm an adult, that I feel like I've developed adult onset ADHD, which I don't know is possible, but I know it's just hyper vigilance. But anyway, do you have any simple tip or whatever?
This is going to sound like it, just ignore the fact that it sounds like a commercial, okay? Because I'm going to point you to all the resources that are part of membership, but just ignore that part, okay? You've already said you want to be a member, and besides, whatever, right? But here's the thing. The sequence of the spiritual mastery classes: igniting resonance, amplifying resonance, embodying resonance. What you'll find, I believe, is, and what many other people have found, is that when you go through igniting resonance, you're going through like a circle. It's like a 9-week circle. And the circle is touching on 9 kind of core themes. And I didn't even see these core themes until after I offered the second class. I didn't know it was the second class. That's why I called it Foundations of Spiritual Mastery 1. I thought I was going to do Foundations of Spiritual Mastery 2 and Foundations of Spiritual. No, it was only that one. And over the years, I had so many sort of similar questions that I taught what was called Introduction to Spiritual Mastery and then Igniting Resonance. And that class, in combination with the second class, with Foundations or Igniting, which has the 6 practices, is going to do exactly what you're looking for. Because what happens is that let me ask you, when you start to engage in, let's say, sitting in this circle, we talk about an idea and then we drift into transmission. Maybe the idea resonates, maybe it doesn't, but transmission sort of anchors it in a way that maybe is difficult to understand. Is that a fair description of how you're experiencing sitting in the circle here?
Yes, a lot of what you say does resonate, like the stages of consciousness. I can totally grasp that. I think I'd jump all over the place in those. But some days more than others. I was able recently to quit a job that had me extremely stressed. So I'm hoping to be able to focus more now that I can take a break from that for a little while. But it's just a matter of staying focused. And I bought a lot of things and then not do the work. And so I really financially can't do that at this moment. But I at least wanted to say thank you and donate right now. And hopefully, as I continue to do the work and unwind, I can get where I can focus, because I just really love your work. And whatever it is you do, just listening to your voice is is soothing and healing for me. So thank you
Wonderful.
is what I'm
Yeah, you're
wanting to
welcome.
say.
Well, so the point about the classes is that there are ideas that are going to sort of address your questions and then experiences to anchor them in. And as you go into those experiences, what you'll find is that sort of fight or flight just starts to fade away, and you integrate at a deeper and deeper level. And if right now financially, being a member doesn't make sense, there are tons of resources on my YouTube channel that are completely free. And if you key in on the resources on the YouTube channel that are around soul embodiment, in particular, you'll discover that those experiences, I think, are really going to help you shift. One of the things I would say, though, is if you find yourself, maybe you won't have this, Michelle, but many people will have this dynamic where it shifts, and then this question comes up, well, how do I sustain this? Or what's actually happening here? Notice that dynamic and what it does to stir up the noise again, the experience of agitation or becoming ungrounded. It's this move back into separation. It's like, this can't be this simple. There has to be something else I need to understand. And when that happens, or if that happens, recognize it as an opportunity, A, to do deeper embodiment work, but also B, how effective the embodiment work is. One of the dynamics that's sort of confusing about embodiment is there's an animation of every aspect of your being presence. And so, of course, that includes the divine and all the things that are actually who you are. But there's also all the things that are still held in separation, the noise. And those things are animated as well. And so when you allow yourself to feel that fully, those transmute. But here's the point I was trying to make, and then I digressed into more of here's the mechanics of embodiment. But here's the dynamic that can be really confusing. As we step into deeper and deeper experiences of resonance, the remaining dissonance appears to become more pronounced. And normally when that happens, as human beings, we think, what am I doing wrong? What isn't working about this? And when that happens, I really encourage you to remember this moment and for what it is, and remember what I'm about to say, which is this is a function of the success of your embodiment to that point. The fact that the noise is appearing to become more pronounced is great news, even though it might not feel like that to you.
Right.
So those are a couple of pointers and some resources that are both paid and free that are available to support you. And I'm so glad you're here, Michelle. Thank you for being part of the circle and for your reflection and sharing today.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions or reflections coming up before we wrap up for today? I will say this little commercial for later in the week. We're going to gather on Friday, this same circle, simulcast in all the ways that we normally do, but the live interactive experience will be in the Zoom room here and then simulcast over on YouTube and then out via the podcast and so on at some point. We're going to gather for just an open Q&A. So I'll open the circle, we'll step into transmission, and then immediately, and we can, as we do anytime, but we can talk about anything you'd like on Friday. We can do that now too, but it's a different time of the day. We'll be live at noon Eastern on Friday. And for everyone who's in the Zoom room here, you'll have an email from me tomorrow with a reminder on Friday that includes the links for coming in to that gathering on Friday. And if there's anything else coming up to ask about or reflect on or give voice to now, I want to open that, be quiet and see if anyone has anything before we wrap up for today. Okay, let's take a deep breath in and hold. And as you release this breath now, just let go of everything that is occupying your thoughts, expressing in your feeling, and in whatever way your being expression is. See if you can release all of that and open further into the mystery, even as we bring our time together for today to a close. All the way out to the count of 8. The breath is such a wonderful reminder. We breathe in, we receive, we breathe out, we let go. What a wonderful circle to travel around. When you're ready, I invite you to begin returning the universal plug. I'll do the same as I begin bringing this transmission to a close. What an honor it is to sit with you, to explore with and without words, to be, to resonate, to sink in. Thank you for making yourself part of this circle, for including yourself here, for giving me an opportunity to sit and witness and explore, resonate with you. Plug all the way in, transmission to a close now. Until we're together again in a couple of days for some Q&A time. Peace. Bye for now.